Welcome to Speak the Truth. We're going to start our show off this afternoon with a video, and then we'll kick it back to Mr. Harold Bell.
My parents are Robert Cordy Vivian is my father, and my mother was Elizabeth Uzetta. Now, they lived on the farm too, right? And but they didn't own their farm. You see what I mean? Is they were trying to buy it, right? When they broke up, with the Depression stopped all that because there wasn't any money. When they broke up, is that then my grandmother and my mother moved into the house in town. You see, if you had any reasonable amount of money, well, then you had farms. What you had was also a house in town that you came in and lived in during the winter. See what I mean? Right? Is because that's how you got social life and everything. Mm-hmm. See? Mm-hmm. So that we had the house in town, came in, moved in on Water Street in Boone, Missouri. Right? And by the way, the property ran back to the railroad tracks, which was way back because it was right down a hill, way down a hill, right? And then the railroad tracks, and it was right beside the Mississippi River. And my grandmother and I used to sit in the upstairs window, right? And that's how she taught me to count, because as you could see the light from the water behind as it shot through as the cars moved, you see, and so you could count off the cars, you see, and so that's how I learned. That's how I learned to count. And of course, each train had 100 to 200 cars, just according to what it was, and so that's how I learned to count. Yes, but it was on Water Street that we but how the house. How we lost that house is quite different. It was arson. Yeah. What happened was, remember, most families during that period, or many families, white, black, yellow, pink, polka dot, right, were they what's the term? But they were not married. They came together in a common law. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's the term I really wanted, right? Mm-hmm. Common law marriages. Well, there was a common law marriage down the street, and this man beat this woman, and she left out into the cold. And my grandmother knew her as a very nice person. Didn't really know her, but knew her as a very nice person. And knew that she didn't deserve that, and she certainly didn't deserve wandering around out in the cold, a woman, and and it's a little more difficult in those days even than now, right? And so she took her in. Her common law husband, right, was so angry he burned our house down. He came in the middle of the night. In those days, you had coal. Some people don't know what cinders are anymore, right? But you had actual coal in the basement, and you had firewood that you used to start the fire in the stove, right? And so he started a fire down there, right? And it was right under my bedroom, by the way.
Were you at home at the time?
Yeah. Oh yeah, we were all home at that time, right?
That must have been a terrifying experience.
Well, I tell you what, is that it's funny that you put it that way. When in the middle of the night, it was actually early in the morning. It was very early in the morning, like 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 or 5, whatever it was. Is that I heard somebody screaming my name, and so I get up and out of the bed, and I jump up and I go to the doorway, and I could see that the front door was open, and I was looking straight out at it, and for some reason, I laughed and went back and jumped in bed. Right? See, I'm 5 years old, right? I went back and jumped in bed, and it was funny. And then I heard my grandmother hollering my name again, and it wasn't funny. Something in the sound told me this was serious. I got out of that bed, I ran through the house, ran out the front door, And because when I looked out that time, it just was something was wrong. And I think what was really wrong was smoke. I think there was it's just a funny feeling to the, I can still sort of see things, right? I couldn't say it was smoke, but I mean, it was like it was never before. And it was kind of not hard to see through, but something was clouding the lookout. And I took out there and ran down the steps, and my grandmother was out in the middle of the street hollering my name. The fireman wouldn't let her get too close.
Okay, Mr. Bell.
All right. Hi, I'm Harold Bell, and this is Speak the Truth. This is Sunday, Zoom Sunday. And first thing I want to introduce my team. Once again, welcome back, Jackie Jones. Jackie had to take a little time off. She lost her dear brother, her only brother, and we're glad to see her back. Buzzy was a big supporter of Kids in Trouble and Inside Sports. Really one of the great guys. Jackie, of course, is a former writer for the Washington Post, the Baltimore Sun, the New York Post. She is now an assistant professor and dean of communications at Morgan State University, and continues to do great things in the community. And she has not a little son following behind her anymore. She got a big son following behind her. In fact, he has accomplished some great things. Also, joining us is, of course, CJ Johnson. CJ is our advocate, all things politics and sports, and he's our youth voice. And our advocate in the community joining us today is, of course, Juanita Bright. How you doing, Juanita? Good to have you. And of course, at the top of the screen left is Gary Johnson, the CEO and the facilitator for BlackMenInAmerica.com, one of the top websites, top 10 out of 500 Black websites on the internet. So congratulations for that great job that he's been doing for well over a decade now. On Speak the Truth, every Sunday seems like I always say, man, that was a great show. That was a great show. One of you say, oh, I'm so glad to be a part of this. I learned so much on Speak the Truth. Well, today is going to be no different whatsoever. Our special guest is an author, a publisher, a novelist, essayist, and the Bronze Medal winner for a male memoir in 2020. He is the CEO and founder of Cascade Publishing House in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was a close friend of one of the greatest civil rights leaders of our time. I'm talking about a man who had the back of the Reverend Martin Luther King. And I'm talking about the one and only C.T. Vivian. We are honored to have as our guest on Speak the Truth, his close friend, Harold Michael Harvey. How you doing, Harold?
Harold, I'm doing great today. How's everyone on the panel doing?
Great.
Everybody's here.
Wonderful.
Harold, tell us about, CT. There was so much, to learn about him. I'm so glad that I was able to go on History Makers and really look at all the great things that he did as a civil rights leader. He was really a leader, even though Martin was out front and was a man. So CT had his back. Tell us about CT and some things that we really need to know about this great man, Harold.
Okay, I sure will. But first, let me introduce you to a couple of items of CT. Okay, I am wearing a CT Vivian tie. It's his gold tie. CT late in life, after receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, pledged was Alpha Phi Alpha, and this was his Alpha tie. And so I'm not Alpha, but I have a CT Vivian tie. And if you look across my shoulder, you will see another CT Vivian tie in a frame with CT, a picture of CT wearing that tie. And up top is the envelope. And on that envelope, one of his youngest daughter dropped by the house a few weeks ago and dropped off this tie. And in the envelope, she says, I just knew you would want to have something of theirs. And so I brought you a tie. And then when she delivered the tie to me. She invited me up to come up and pick out a couple other ties. And so I had thought that I would wear that tie in the frame, but I couldn't give it justice. And so I decided I would frame it. And so she said, well, I think you should have a tie that you can wear and one that you can just keep for all times. And so that explains the gold tie of C.T. Vivian. Now, he was quite a guy. I mean, my heart just smiled as I listened and watched the video moments ago, because I have had literally probably 950 to 100 and to 1,000 conversations with him, sitting in that room for hours, asking him questions and listening to the stories that he would tell. And you know, we don't know of him really in history. He didn't stay in that front. Uh, 10 years before the Montgomery bus boycott, C.T. Vivian had organized boycotts in Peoria, Illinois. You know, he was telling you the story about how they got from the farm to the city. And after that house burned, the grandmother moved the family to Peoria. And so that's where he spent his formative years. He attended school and elementary, high school, and went off to college. Well, in the 1940s, C.T. Vivian was organizing bus boycotts and sit-ins in restaurants in Peoria, Illinois. He then moves to Nashville, Tennessee, and he is working. I often say that if he had not joined the movement, that what we would know of C.T. Vivian would be that he would have been an outstanding publisher, because he was a newspaperman at heart. So he went up to Nashville to work in the publishing house for the Baptist convention. And while in Nashville, he organized sit-ins. Okay. And so when this was before Rosa Parks, before Montgomery. And so after Montgomery in 1963, CT and James Lawson bringing these young kids in from Fisk and Tennessee State. And so they are teaching them this nonviolent way to address grievances. And so as a result of that, his reputation for nonviolent direct action has began to spread throughout the Southeast. King knew about it. So in 1963, just shortly before the church was bombed in Birmingham, the leader of that movement, called Dr. King and said, "We need some help up here." Fred Shuttleworth called him and said, "We need some help. Can you send somebody up here to help organize us?" And so SCLC was a very small organization, and it didn't have anybody they could send. So King wrote to C.T. Vivian. He was aware of the efforts that C.T. was undertaking in Nashville. Now, let me sort of backtrack for a minute. Until the 1963 March on Washington, what you had was, in all of your local communities, you had improvement associations. You had organizations in Montgomery, in Birmingham, in Macon, Georgia, where I grew up, in Nashville, in the District of Columbia, in Los Angeles, in Watts, in Detroit, in Chicago. You had organizations that were working for the improvement of to try to get rid of the second-class citizenship status that Black people seemed to have at that time. But there was no way that they were not connected, and they didn't get to connected until who was the streetcar porter? His name will come to me in a minute. But he told Martin they needed an umbrella organization to pull all of these community improvement associations together. Bayard Rustin, excuse me. So Bayard tells Martin he needs to pull all these groups together. Well, Martin didn't have a large organization at SCLC when Fred Shuttlesworth asked for a little assistance. So he wrote to Nashville, wrote to Vivian, asked him if he would come and join the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so CT said that he would. And he took the assignment, he accepted the assignment to go to Birmingham, and he organized that march. You know, one thing that Vivian understood is that if you could shock, if that the world could be shocked by the mistreatment of Black people, that would gain support and it would lead to eradication of segregation and Jim Crowism. And so they went throughout the schools in Birmingham and got high school students and elementary school students to stage those protests. And of course, Bull Connor, being the bad guy that he was, brought out the dogs and the water hoses, and the world saw that. Shortly thereafter, you had the bombing of the church, and we lost the lives of those 4 little girls. And then later in '63, Martin called the nation together, this large march, because Bayard Rustin said we needed some way to tie all of these organizations throughout the country together. So they called the march. And it was, so he then, after Birmingham, King appointed Vivian as the director of the national affiliates. Now, SCLC doesn't have members per se. They're not a membership-based organization. SCLC is a affiliate-based organization. You know, so what they do is, so what they did is they became that central command center for other organizations throughout the country, and so it made it a big group. And so it was Vivian's job to plan and strategize the march on Washington. I was sitting in his study where we just watched on the video one day, and I said to him, Doc, we called each other Doc. Doc, I don't see you in DC at the March on Washington. Where were you? Were you there? And he said, oh no, I wasn't there. My wife was there though. And I said, well, I don't see you in Selma. Were you there? Oh no, I wasn't there, but my wife was there. But you know, he was there. He was behind the scenes plotting and planning and organizing and strategizing to make everything work out all right. And that was, you know, till his last days, he carefully thought and planned and tried to figure out what was the next step, you know, to get Black people where they needed to be in this country. You know, so that's sort of a little background information on Dr. Vivian.
Mm-hmm.
Just to get us started.
Jackie?
Yeah, I was surprised to learn that SCLC wasn't really a membership organization. That's a nugget that, but it explains a lot of how they were able to kind of move behind the scenes and among groups to organize people. Talk a little bit about the importance of that role, being able to not tip your hand, because I'm sure there were a lot of people who were trying to, you know, that I think there was a whole debate about the march in the Selma about Lyndon Johnson saying he was supportive of a march, but he didn't want them in Selma. He wanted them to take the march somewhere else. And so there were always people who were trying to infiltrate the organizations and get information. And so people like Vivian and Bayard Rustin played really key roles. And because of Bayard Rustin's sexual orientation, there was always an attempt to try to trip him up or out him in some way to try to pull down the movement. And so I'm assuming that all of those kinds of the coordination that went into pulling these things off was critical.
It was, and you know, the Vivian plays an instrumental role in the Selma to Montgomery March, and as you note, Ms. Jones, you know, Johnson didn't want the march to go through Selma. They were trying to figure out another way to just to maybe spring up in Montgomery and have a protest or demonstration on the steps of the Capitol and let that be it. He didn't necessarily want to have to send troops down to guard the marches as they march from Selma. So what happens is, back in I guess September of 60, I'll be 65. There was Jimmy Lee Jackson and his family, his mother and his grandfather, had tried for years to register to vote in Dallas County, which is the county seat Selma is the county seat for Jackson, Dallas County. And so, but they were always rebuffed and turned away. And so they had participated, had gone down, I think mid-February, gone down to register. And following a speech or a sermon that had been preached at the Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma by Dr. Vivian. The history records there was about 500 people in the church that night, and so that evening. And so when they left to go down. The Jimmy Lee Jackson, his mother and his father went down with others in a group to register. So the police came in and bust up their procedure down to the courthouse, and some scuffling started. A cop pushed and shoved Jimmy's mother, and the next thing we know, Jimmy is in the hospital. Well, about 2-3 days later, Martin comes to town, and Martin goes in and visits with Jimmy. He says Jimmy is in good spirits, and Jimmy is looking forward to getting back on the battlefield and fighting to get his right to vote. 2 days after Martin's visit, he's visited by state officials, law enforcement officials. A day later, he's dead. Mm-hmm. So after Jimmy, King comes in and preaches, eulogizes Jimmy Lee Jackson. They leave, and CT is there to man the SCLC office in Selma. Now, let me back up for a minute. You may know the story, but the way, but this is a name that is seldom mentioned in history. Amelia Boynton, she later remarried and became Robinson, but Amelia Boynton, on the day that Martin had gone up to DC and Johnson had signed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the owner of the Coca-Cola bottling company here in Atlanta had allowed King and his entourage to go up to DC, had flown him up there and flown him back. Well, when they got back to Atlanta that evening, Amelia had driven over from Selma. And she pressured King to come to Selma because she and her husband, Mr. Boynton, had been trying to register people to vote for years. So King shook his head and said, well, you know, we just left the White House and we talked to Johnson about it. And Johnson said, you've got to force my hand, and there's really nothing we can do right at this point to force his hand. She said, well, come to Selma. And so King then went down to Selma. The Jimmy Jackson situation occurs, and then they leave CT Vivian in charge of the SCLC office. Well, on the day that CT was to be relieved by Hosea Williams, Hosea was running late. And King had a policy that if your relief had not arrived, you had to stay there until they came, because that office was to be manned at all times. And so because Hosea was late, after Jackson was killed, Amelia came and knocked on the door at SCLC and says, we're going to march down there. You need to get up and come on and go with us. And he says, I'm waiting on to come. So I got to be in Montgomery in a couple of hours. And she says, no, we're going now. So he got up and he went down and he left the march. So he's on the steps of the courthouse and he tells Sheriff Clark that he thinks he's as big a racist as Hitler, but he's not as big a racist as Hitler. Vivian was a man who spoke in a lot of puns. He was a pun king. And so he understood the psychology of Sheriff Clark. He knew that Clark thought he was the biggest racist, if not in the country, at least in Alabama, biggest racist than George Wallace. And so he used that and he needled it. He told him that he could not stop these Negroes from registering to vote. And that he thought he was as big a racist as Hitler, but he was not as big a racist as Hitler. And so that was very insulting to Clark. Clark punches him. And as a result of that punch, that now galvanizes this march on to Montgomery. Well, Vivian told me one day, and you know, he told me, I think the only time in his life he was ever afraid. And if you knew Vivian, you knew that he wasn't afraid of anything or anybody or any situation. But he sort of confided to me one day sitting in his study. He said that on his way out of town, so after the demonstration on the courthouse steps, after he's been punched by Clark, Jose Williams shows up. And so now he can leave town, right? Only problem is the good old boys are following him out of town. He discovers that he's been followed. He then whisks in behind the Black funeral home, goes in, and he spends the night at the funeral home. And he said that was as bad as it got for him. And the following day, the people in the funeral home went out and scouted a passageway for him to get out of town. Well, and then the following week, King has Jose and John Lewis to begin that march across the bridge. And here comes Sheriff Clark again saying, oh no, you Negroes can't leave town. You know, you can't go across that bridge and leave town and think you're gonna walk down to Montgomery. And so they sent the horses in and the cattle prods in and beat it and bludgeoned people. Mrs. Boynton told me she thought that, and she said, in fact, they had given her up for dead, that they had actually put her into the hearse. And there were some people who wanted to go with the body to make sure that they didn't desecrate the body. And they saw her stir and they got her out of that hearse. But you know, she doesn't get the credit for being a big voters' rights advocate, but it was her impetus that got Martin to come to Selma, that started the Selma to Montgomery march that ends up, you know, before the year was out, King had given Johnson a reason to sign the 1965 Voters' Rights Act. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of like how the backstory, how all that came together.
Wow.
Fantastic. Christopher, you got a question for Harold?
Really just taking notes on how to build a successful movement. Honestly, really, it's a great balance of, I think, morality and strategy without compromising the morality, but also being strategic. And I think maybe the question I have is, what advice do you have to young people trying to recreate similar movements today, especially with moneyed interests being in much more control of the government than they were in the 1960s, since Citizens United, Supreme Court's decisions is dark money that is overflowing in politics, that it makes it even harder to twist those arms and to make it politically convenient for the people in power to listen?
I think you just hit on it, CJ. It's morality and it's strategy. These men and women were guided by a sense of spiritual morality, unlike anything we had probably seen in 2,000 years. Okay, so spiritual morality was their guide, and everything they did was plotted and planned to the T. I know this younger generation, the Black Lives Matter generation, will do things on the spur, and they're all about action and the movement, and it doesn't really matter how it all weaves in together. It's just get out there and do something. Well, we do have to do something, but what those guys had was a sense of strategizing, planning everything out. Okay. I mean, they actually planned what they were going to do, and then they acted upon it. So there are a lot of, and see, Martin had this core group of people, and they would sit around in a hotel room, or in the conference room at SCLC or wherever they happen to be in the pastor's study in the church, if that's where they happen to be. And they would everybody go around the room and everybody would voice their opinions. And then they would try to then figure out what was the best strategy what was the goal, and what's the best strategy to obtain that goal. So I think you're right on it. And I wish that the younger generation in their activism, would spend a little bit more time plotting and planning, scheming and dreaming. Because when you think it through and act it all out and try to figure out how it's going to come out in the end, you have a better grasp on success. For instance, the core strategy was to get for a demonstration. In that day, the core strategy was to get a reaction from the big bad sheriff that could be beamed around the world and thereby galvanize support. Okay? It wasn't go out there and fight with anybody, to bust out a window, to loot a store. It was to maneuver them. And now King talked about the place where he found the least success was in Albany, Georgia. And guess what happens in Albany? So they go down to Albany, and first, here's the strategy. They would first send Hosea Williams down. So Hosea is the rebel rouser. Hosea would go down, hold a mass meeting in the church, and whip up the crowd and get everybody excited, ready to do something. Okay? Strategy. Plan. You would think he was a wild maniac, but it wasn't. It's all an act. It's all part of the plan. After he got the crowd whipped up, the next day or 2 days later, Andrew Young, smooth talking Andrew Young, would come in and talk to the city fathers, white fathers, and say, well, we can smooth this over. We can control Hosey, but here's what you got to do for us. Okay? And then Martin's going to come in, and Martin's going to do this. But if you all will agree to do this for Martin, then Martin will leave. Okay? So, but when he got to Albany, the old mayor wouldn't talk with him. Okay? He couldn't get the police chief to react to the marchers. So they then eventually retreated and left Albany without a substantial victory in terms of having gotten the city to agree to eliminate some vestige of Jim Crowism in that town. But that is how they strategized and planned, and that's how the group today, I believe, ought to do. Think it through, figure out what your goal is, and how best to get the people in power to give in to the concession that you're seeking. And they were willing to take incremental gains until they hit the home run. You get a run on. I'm an old baseball player. You get a run on, you get another one on. Then that guy in the third hole or fourth hole, you want him hitting the ball out of the ballpark. And so that's how they played it. Good strategy, I think.
Fantastic. Juanita?
I was sitting there. I was thinking as you were telling us the story that yeah, passion and strategy is what made a lot of things successful and created a lot of change. And I'm always thinking about young people, and I was so moved by your story just now. I believe that storytelling certainly can be a tool, very positive tool to get young people who do want to just get up and do something and doesn't necessarily understand all the dynamics behind um, having a movement and being effective and reaching some goals and things like that. So, yeah, amazing. You're amazing. Thank you.
God bless you.
Gary?
Yeah, I wanted to, I'm a leadership development consultant, and I wanted to see if you could address something that I heard years ago about Mr. Vivian's Leadership Institute and how they helped galvanize the city to help Morris Brown College out, where I understand that about the water, where the city has shut off the water, but through his Leadership Institute, they had gotten the citizens to raise money and then eventually negotiate a deal for that historically Black college down there.
Wow, it's like deja vu. My wife and I were talking about CT's involvement with Morris Brown College situation just yesterday, and I and I told her a story, and that I knew, but she never knew. And so I'm going to go back even before the water was shut off, okay, and even before the formation of the CT Vivian Institute. I'm thinking it's probably late 1990s, early 2000s, okay. At that time, I was still actively engaged in the practice of law. And somehow I was over in the federal courthouse and I ran into CT Vivian. And so of course, we struck up a conversation. Well, what are you doing down here, Doc? He says, Morris Brown, there's a hearing over in bankruptcy court and I'm going to testify. And I said, well, okay, when I finish my case, and I'm going to come over and sit in and support you. And when I get over there, he's on the stand. And now we're getting back to strategy again, okay? So CT's on the stand there. I don't remember now what the issue was, but there was some question of if the school was no longer engaged in the educational pursuits of students, that the land reverted back to, I believe they got the land from Clark, Atlanta Clark University. And so there was some fight in bankruptcy court over the property. And if Morris Brown had lost the property in bankruptcy at that time, then of course the school would have gone out of existence, right? Well, I don't know what CT's, I don't know how he came involved with Morehouse. I do know that when I meet him, he's probably in his 70s. And when he would come home from being out of town, he would go over to Morris Brown and run up the stadium steps. That was how he kept himself physically fit, probably why he lived to be 96 years old and walked practically until about probably the last 90 days of his life. He was able to be mobile. But he's on the witness stand. And as I tell the story to my wife, the judge, because the questions coming from the creditor's attorney is not getting the information to the judge so he can make a decision, right? And I tell my wife, I says, now, Vivian's a very smart guy, but to have seen him on the witness stand, you wouldn't have known it. And I said to her, that was really an act, because he knew that if he had given the judge the information based upon the status of the school, they would have lost the school then. So he was there fighting for the school. and he was playing dumb as a fox. Like he didn't understand the legal significance of what the court was asking him. But I knew him. I knew that he knew. And I had often wanted to ask him about that to confirm what I thought. But I always thought I had all the time in the world, forever, to ask him some of the questions that I had in my mind. So we can go back to the late 90s, early 2000s, before he had formed the C.T. Vivian Institute, and see that he had this interest in fighting to preserve Morris Brown. Now, let's see what would happen. Had that hearing, so that the court doesn't rule, right? It's just boggled up. The judge doesn't know what to do because he doesn't have any information, solid information. He doesn't understand what's going on. And the witness is not giving him clear information so he can decide on this side or that side. So the guy punts and the school stays alive. And today, a few weeks ago it was announced they can now begin to accept that students can now apply for student aid, which means that the school is back. Now, all of that, had he not been so crafty, had he gone into court and told the judge and showed the judge how smart he was, okay, school's gone. But it wasn't about him. If he had to make someone think that he wasn't smart in order to save Morris Brown College, that's what he did. And that's what I observed him do that day. And he saved that school. And so, of course, there are always challenges. The water challenge was a challenge. The C.T. Vivian Institute got involved, and and people contributed money and paid the bill, and so the school was saved to fight another day. And then, of course, now, they're almost on the verge of having a significant number of students enrolled in that college. So, I'm just so happy for them.
Wow, that's a great story because I didn't know that much. I know they had raised, I remember back then, I think I was talking to a friend of mine about $500,000, but that's a great story. Wow.
So and the thing I try to do, there are historians who will who can call the balls and strikes, right? But I tend to think there are these little things that really makes up the history. And I think if we understood those things, we'll have a better understanding of how the Civil Rights War was won, how we defeated Jim Crow. And if we understand how we defeated Jim Crow, we can understand how we can defeat white supremacy that has sort of risen its head in the country of late. So my work, as I write and as I read and as I research, I try to tell these small stories, and I put the backdrop of history on them so that you really get an understanding and an appreciation for what went on and what took place and why it's significant, the overall significance of the success that we have. It was, so that, and when I would sit and talk with Vivian, those would be the type of questions I would ask. What was Martin thinking when so-and-so took place? And then he would launch into a story.
So who are the successors to them, to the Vivians and the Hosea Williams of the world?
Stacey Abrams, to name one. Kamala Harris. We're in a new era now, where we didn't have access to government, to politics, to political offices back in that day, and so our fighters were street fighters. But today, thanks to our parents pushing education, and then my generation pushing education on CJ's generation. We have people in place now, so the new leaders are Stacey Abrams or the Jamie Harrisons, the Kamala Harrises. That's where we look for our leadership today. Barack Obama. One thing that Vivian told me before the Obama first term was over, he said that Obama would be more important to us in our struggle in America after he left office, more so than while he was in office. And I says, well, what do you mean by that, Doc? He says, well, he knows when the issues arise, he knows them from the inside perspective, from the ultimate inside perspective. And he can help us to shape and frame the dialogue for how the battle should go down. And if you notice how he came into Georgia, if you notice the Georgia senatorial runoff race here, but Obama came in and he framed it. You can get a lot done if you send these two, because if you don't send the two Democratic candidates to the United States Senate, then we've got the same bottleneck that I had in 2008, actually in 2012, after the midterm, that dogged him out for the remainder of his time in office. And so those are our new leaders. Former President Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, Hakeem Jeffries, Stacey Abrams probably is the most, to me, she's probably the most powerful woman in this country. Or I put it in the top three with Harris, Pelosi, then I have to say Abrams.
Well, Harold, one thing before we get away from CT Vivian, I want to say that, I got, you really sent me back to do my homework, and I got so fascinated and tied up with reading about him and listening to his videos. And I was saying to you, I'm not no way similar to CT Vivian, but we had so much in common, I come out of a common law house, my mom and dad were not married. Back on my birth certificate, just got the male Bell, not Harold Bell, the male Bell. And then there was the influence of my grandmother, who I went to live with and raised me in church going. My great grandfather laid the first brick to build Mount Airy Baptist Church here in Washington in 1893. And living with my grandmother, we were in church 3 or 4 times a week. My grandmother led the choir, she played the organ, she kept the books, and we were there. And I was able to see that type of strong Black leadership through my grandmother and through my uncles and aunt, And then my house burned down when I was just 3 or 4 years old. My mother left to go to the store one cold morning and left the kerosene lamp burning, and we went there with my dog. And when she got back, fire engines were all over the place. The only thing left standing was the outhouse. So I know about a house burning down. And then he was a sports editor. He was into the sports thing, which is my thing. So man, it's a fascinating story. And I'm so glad that we were able to get you here to talk about him. Gary, I want you to go to Martin Luther King right now so we can take a look at Martin Luther King.
Harold, can I just mention this? One other story. It's a sports story.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to take this time, but I think it's
okay. That's already your show.
So one morning, late 90s, early 2000s, a knock on the door, about 9 o'clock. I open the door, it's CT Vivian. He's got a package in his hand. He got a newspaper in his hands. He says, I thought about you all night, Brother Harvey. I said, Doc, what are you doing thinking about me all night? He says, I just couldn't wait till the morning could come until I could walk down here and show you this. Read this. So he handed me an article written in, it may have been the New York Times. And the article was about the father of Serena and the Williams sisters.
Yeah.
And he talked about the fact that they were the only two. A lot of tournaments they go to, the only blacks in those tournaments were his daughters. And that he said that the way you solved the problem was to get more in the pipeline, you had to own the pipeline. Well, Vivian was a fan of baseball like I am. And so he said to me, and there's two things he asked me to work on. He said to me that we need to develop a baseball academy to get more black kids into professional baseball. Now, we're talking 2000s, that 20 years have gone down the chute. The numbers were dwindling then. I think at the height of the late 70s, we had about 28% of the players in the league were African Americans. Mm-hmm. And by 2000, I think we're probably down to about 12 or 14%.
Under
and
10%.
Today, well,
under 10%.
2 years ago, I haven't seen any numbers for 20 yet, but the 2018 numbers we were 6.8%.
Mm-hmm.
The Asians were 3.5%. So if the trend continues to go, there'll be more in the next 10 years. There'll be more Asians in Major League Baseball than there are African Americans. But he saw that trend developing, and he wanted to develop a baseball academy, and asked me to help him to work on it. And we did some work. But then when he received the Medal of Freedom, he changed his focus into then building his institute and also to establishing a library. His goal was, and his children are carrying on that goal, was to have a library that contained every book written by every black writer in America. Okay, and in terms of, and now he was a book collector. And I know when I met him in the mid-1980s, he had the largest collection of original autograph books of black writers in the country. And I would imagine he continued to add on to his collection. So then he started to work on those two projects, and then he and I didn't work that closely on that, but I'm still committed to the Baseball Academy. And the other issue that he was very concerned about, and that was reparations. He believed that should happen and should occur. And so those are two things he left undone. Baseball Academy that would get more black kids playing baseball. And also, there are some nice paying jobs in analytics for people who are math whiz in baseball. Baseball now is all about the analytics. They base their lineups today based on analytics. Back in the day when I played, it was just a gut feeling. I think Harvey's going to have a good day today, so Harvey is penciled in. He's my outfielder today. But that's different. So there are a lot of jobs for people in analytics today in Major League Baseball. All the teams have them. In fact, all the sports have them now. And those are good paying jobs. And the front office jobs are good paying jobs. So we wanted to develop an academy that would develop all of those aspects of black participation in baseball, from the front office down onto the playing field and then the coaching level. And of course, reparations speaks for itself. We worked all those years and were not compensated for it. I found my grandmother's, quick story, I found my grandmother's grandfather in 1847 standing on a slave, Georgia, handcuffed and ankle cuffed with his younger brother. And they had heard that there was a certain planter in the area that was very mean to the people he enslaved. And so when the bid started, this planter started to bid on them. And they said, "Oh, mister, save your money. we don't like you and we ain't gonna live with you. He said, well, that's why I got the bloodhounds. And so he won the bid, took them back to one of his plantations. This particular planter owned 5 plantations in the middle Georgia area. And after the third day, the 2 brothers headed for the swamp, and they stayed in the swamp for 3 years until they learned that this planter had sold them to another planter. They walked out of the swamp covered with hair, so you only could see the black of their eyes, but their hair covered their entire bodies. And they walked up to the planter who had bought them, turned themselves in, worked for him throughout the period of enslavement, throughout the war. And after the war, when freedom came, they both became very successful. The brother, when Reconstruction ended, he left Georgia thinking that the Klan was going to come in and re-enslave Black people. He left and headed for Colorado and became very wealthy in the silver mining industry out there. So, but they owe us because we worked all those years for nothing. So reparation is the easy one. And those were 2 things that were on Dr. Vivian's mind very heavily, till his last days.
Gary, what do you think of Martin Luther King?
Yeah, I'll give you a few minutes here. This is something that I've run on the website about it's a rare speech of Dr. King talking to some junior high school kids in Philadelphia, I believe, and it's about what is their blueprint for life. Let's go.
That is what is in your life's blueprint. This is the most important and crucial period of your lives, for what you do now and what you decide now at this age may well determine which way your life shall go. And whenever a building is constructed, you usually have an architect who draws a blueprint. And that blueprint serves as the pattern, as the guide, as the model for those who are to build the building. And a building is not well erected without a good, sound, and solid blueprint. Now, each of you is in the process of building the structure of your lives. And the question is whether you have a proper, a solid, and a sound blueprint. And I want to suggest some of the things that should be in your life's blueprint. Number 1 in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your own worth, and your own somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel that you are nobody. Always feel that you count. Always feel that you have worth. And always feel that your life has ultimate significance. Now that means that you should not be ashamed of your color. You know, it's very unfortunate that in so many instances, our society has placed a stigma on the Negro's color. You know, there are some Negroes who are ashamed of themselves. Don't be ashamed of your color. Don't be ashamed of your biological features. Somehow you must be able to say in your own lives and really believe it, I am black but beautiful, and believe it in your heart. And therefore, you need not be lured into purchasing cosmetics advertised to make you lighter. Neither do you need to process your hair to make it appear straight. I have good hair, and it is as good as anybody else's hair in the world. And we got to believe that.
Oh my goodness. You can see the rest of that on the website. It's on the homepage at blackmeninamerica.com. It's a great speech. I just put it up there 2 days ago. I've had educators email me and tell me that they are going to show this, if they haven't already done so, to their students.
Wow.
So I will leave it at that.
Okay, what I want to do is bring everybody in and at least give them a minute to talk about Dr. King, because I want to also get to Muhammad Ali. Let's start up at the top. Jackie?
Yeah, I think what I love that speech. I'm gonna use that in my opening video when the classes resume. I always do a little something to let the students know what's coming for the semester, and I think that's a good way to tell them that it's on them, that they get to decide who they are and how they are to be treated, and that if they really want to get ahead like they say they do, they know that it's in their hands. It's not for somebody else to do for them, and that they need to be proud and determined of what they're going to do. So I can hardly wait. They're going to be sick of me by the end of the first week of classes.
Okay, Juanita.
Because I remember one of the most profound things about coming up and listening to Martin, I used to always think that he always made it a point of making me feel as though I was valuable and beautiful, and that anything that I wanted, I could achieve it. And so I'd never seen that clip. That was a cool clip. Yeah.
It really was. It really was. CJ.
Yeah, it was a great clip, and I'm glad to see more of that. And it's really frustrating to see Dr. King's legacy consistently co-opted and whitewashed for people who are just, who don't really believe in his message and don't really listen to his causes for not just racial justice, but economic justice and dignity for people, that I think is lost. It's definitely with the mainstream media and their faux celebration of King. So it's great to hear some authentic clips, some real receipts, and to not have his message lost and muddied up and co-opted by people who would use it for their own ends.
All right, Harold.
Well, I like the way he wove in "You're Black and You're Beautiful," and if you stop to think about it, the Black Lives Matter, the whole idea is that even after, I guess that's like 1967 when he spoke to that group, until a few years ago, Black lives just still didn't matter. People still didn't, the dominant culture still did not believe that Blacks were beautiful, were worthy. And, so King articulated that so well back in 1967. And I think, Dr. Jones, for you to use that with your students today, I mean, it's just very timely. Although, it was a speech he gave so many years ago, that was like 11th grade for me. And, Martin came to my hometown the week before, 7 days before his last day on earth, drumming up people to participate in the Poor People's Campaign that would have taken place that spring. And I wanted to go, but the next day was a school day, and my mama said I couldn't go. And then a week later, the day after, I'm sitting in a classroom, only Negro in my classroom, probably only about 70 Negroes in the entire school. I integrated the school, at least to junior high school. So a few years later, when Martin is assassinated, I remember the discussion and how there was only one teacher, she passed 2 years ago, in the whole school who actually talked about it that day. And I had been recruited in what we would call an advanced placement class today. I was recruited by the teacher to be in the foreign relations class. And so the teacher, so she then talked about it during that class period. And of course, I didn't have very much to say. And when I finally, so when everybody spoke and they was talking about how, they weren't really upset that Dr. King was gone. Of course, I had cried all night. And to hear their callous responses and finally the teacher called on me and because I wouldn't speak and I couldn't talk about it. But I do remember, I do recall in my discussion, I mentioned something about comparing the assassination of Dr. King with that of Malcolm X. And I made the mistake of saying that Malcolm was assassinated in 1964. And a kid, little hippie kid, sitting a couple of seats over from me, says, "Oh no, Malcolm wasn't assassinated in 64, it was 65. I said, "Oh no, it was 64. He says, "Oh no." Because my father worked for the FBI at that time, stationed in Boston, Massachusetts, and he was in the Audubon Ballroom the day that Malcolm was assassinated. So that's how, that's King for me. He was such an emotionally inspiring person, but I can't also help to think about the government collusions to take him out, to take him away from us. And here was a man who taught peace, and they removed him from our midst because he came in peace. I don't know if that's off the topic, but that's what it does for me.
Gary, I'm let you do your thing, and then once you go to Muhammad Ali, and then we'll go off with Muhammad Ali. But go ahead on King, Gary.
Yeah, my comments are very brief. I just marvel at how people like Dr. King and Dr. Vivian and the whole team, how young they were. My goodness. I think he was like, for the Montgomery bus boycott, I think he was 26 years old. Just how young. I know he was 39 when he was assassinated, and that's really young, but
25.
Was it? Okay. Yeah,
25, yeah.
Just how young and the things that they were able to do to bring a city to its knees. And, I'm like, wow. So yeah, that's I still marvel at that. So, Mr. Bell, you want to go to see something, Mr. Muhammad Ali?
Yeah, today is his birthday.
There's so many clips about Ali that I found one of Ali actually outside of this country talking to a British reporter about Black life in America as only Ali could do. So I hit you with a couple of this, and then you tell me when you had enough, Mr. B.
No, you decided. That's all right.
All right.
He hangs out with his own. White people are cultures different from Black people. Puerto Ricans and Indonesians cannot integrate. Egyptians and Germans cannot integrate. Australians and Mexicans cannot integrate. They have different foods. They have different music, different cultures. See, you white and I'm Black. If white people have a party tonight and Black people have a party, the party will be 100% different. The music. I go to a white restaurant. We integrate, Jay White. You go to a white restaurant, you got to look all day on the jukebox to find some music.
No. At our party, we'll have Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder.
Let me tell you now, if I go pale jukebox in a white restaurant. Anybody black will tell you. You got to look all over that box for some black music. Hank Snow, Johnny Cash, all kind of names I ain't never heard of. You know, when that train comes around that mountain, when that train comes, and that truck driver there. So what I'm saying is, they don't know what that music, but that fits the white culture. You go in our joints, oh baby, don't leave. Oh, I cried all night. Who's that running out of my back door, honey? Oh, but see, those are our problems. Then I go to Chinese restaurant, clean, ting, tang, tong, tong, ting. So we can't integrate. We ain't gonna never have no peace. The culture, the nature's different. I don't hate you. We can eat in your restaurant. We want to marry your women. We got your women now. It ain't nothing we can't do today. But these things the dog got. I see dogs on television eating out of the same plate with white people. I see dogs in the buses, and they do everything with the dogs. So I ain't getting nothing the dog ain't got. So really, ain't nothing in this integration. I need some land. I need some jobs. My people need jobs. We need something so we can build and do for ourselves, and we must have some land. 40 million people. You know, it's a lot of Negroes just in New York and Cleveland, Baltimore, Washington, California. It's a lot of black. Ooh, that's a whole nation. 40 million, man. They don't tell you the truth about that. They want us to stop having babies. They give them birth.
All right, Mr. B.
All right, well, I just want to say definitely, man, you know, he's been special to me. He made me the chosen one. And to this day, I still am amazed that this man came from Zaire, Africa, one of the biggest fights of his life. And when he got to New York, he didn't call Albert Cosell or Brian Gumble, the brother at 60 Minutes. He called Harold Bell, a little known sports talk show host in Washington, D.C. That was the man. That's how he thought about his people. He thought about his people, man. And I'm just saying, man, that I still miss him today. And he was flawed like anybody else, but he cared about his people, man. I have never heard Muhammad Ali say something about racism concerning a white person, a Jewish person, or Asian person, and back up and do the James Brown and apologize. I have never. Everything that he said, he stuck by. You see these athletes out here today, they say something, and sure enough, the Jewish community get mad at them, they come back and apologize. You know, Muhammad Ali, man, has street sense, common sense, and he has book sense, whether you believe it or not. Just a great, fantastic human being. Let's go up, Jackie. Let's go take 30 seconds from you, Jackie.
You know, what I always was most impressed about Ali was his humanity, that he was he was thoughtful. He was the kind of person who wasn't just shooting from the hip. He knew whereof he spoke. He read, as you mentioned, Harold, you know, people kind of thought he was just kind of, you know, a cut up, but he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was saying. He was a very strategic thinker. And I think that's why he had so much impact, because he knew what he was saying. He knew who his audience was, and he knew how to target the message.
Okay, Juanita.
I'm good. This is an awesome reading. You know, I've learned a lot, and I got to smile. And thank you, guys. Thank you. Nice to meet you, Mr. Harvey.
My pleasure, Juanita.
Okay, Harold, go ahead.
Well, you know, I wish I got a chance to meet Muhammad Ali. I did not. But such a great fighter, such a great humanitarian, such a great human spirit. You know, just such a wonderful man. And as Ms. Jones said, he was a strategic thinker. I like the way he put the sports journalists on their back feet. He had them backtracking, and it's like he was punching a fighter, pushing a fighter throughout the ring. And I like to see him do that. Although, as a journalist, you know, I don't care for people to push me around like that, but it was just such an art the way he did it. My son is a sports journalist. He works over at Fox Sports after spending about 4 years over at ESPN. And he had the pleasure when he worked at ESPN to cover the Muhammad's passing and transition and his services. He was the lead reporter on that for ESPN, and he got a chance to interview Muhammad's brother,
Rahman.
And he was touched by Rahman's the feelings that he just had for his brother and the respect that Rahman had for his brother. And I think that through that interview, he and Rahman became friends, and they'll probably be friends for life because of the way he handled that situation. But Muhammad was just such a great guy. I remember I couldn't watch the get news about the fight in Zaire, but I think I must have woken up about 4:30 or so in the morning, and I heard the radio announcement that he had won. I said, "Oh my God, how in the world did he beat that giant?" But I was so elated that he had done so. Thank you.
DJ?
Yeah, Ali just had a level of authenticity that just couldn't be fabricated or replicated. That's it.
Barry?
Man transcended sports. Like you said, he was flawed, but he transcended sports.
Right.
And it's still around today. So it speaks for itself.
Well, like Harold said, there's always other stories. I got to tell this story, man. I was the DC Chamber of Commerce had chosen Muhammad Ali as athlete of the century. This was after the Zaire fight. So Jimmy Denson, who was president of the DC Chamber of Commerce, called me. He said, "Harold, look, we're gonna honor Muhammad, and he's coming in town on such day. Can you go to the airport and pick him up?" I said, "Yeah, I'll go out there and pick him up." So anyway, this particular day, I go out to the National Airport, and I get out there, and I'm looking for him, and I can't find him. So I see this pretty young lady sitting in the corner. I recognize her as being Veronica, and I went over and introduced myself. She said, "Harold, when you get that food, he's over there by the baggage carrier, and he's signing autographs, talking and everything." So I said, I stood up on a chair and I hollered, "Hey, Muhammad, Harold Bell, come on, man, let's go." He looked at me and said, "Cool it, Harold Bell." He stayed there for another hour before we finally got him to the hotel. And we went to the dinner that night. 5,000 people, overflow crowd, standing room only crowd. Now, Mayor Washington gets up and is going to present him with this big plaque, right? So during the middle of the presentation, my wife Hattie and I were sitting at a table with some more friends, and Muhammad Ali stops the mayor in the middle of the presentation and say, "Harold Bell, stand up. Harold, where are you?" So the mayor looked at him. Hattie looks at me and said, "What's going on?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Stand up," and I'm standing up. So he said, "Mr. Mayor, you know Harold Bell?" Mayor looked out there. He said, "Mr. Mayor, do you know Harold Bell?" So the mayor finally saw me. He said, "Yeah, I know Harold Bell. Who doesn't know Harold Bell?" He said, "Well, let me tell you something. That's my friend. And I don't want nothing to happen to Harold Bell. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The mayor looked, said, "Yeah, champ, I understand exactly what you're saying." He said, "Mr. Mayor, you're not a bigger fool as you look." In the house he brought the house down. And even the mayor had to laugh. So I'm saying that is the kind of individual that he was, man. He looked out for people, man. Whenever you didn't even know he was looking out for you, and he had you on his mind. Well, Michael, I want to thank you, man, for coming out, man. You were fantastic, man. Love your presentation, man. And my wife just want to say hi. Is that right? What? Oh, okay. She's all right. Okay.
Hello.
Okay. Anyway, I want to thank everybody, the team. Another great presentation. And remember, that every black face you see is not your brother, and every white face is not your enemy. Until next Sunday at the same time, I'm Harold Bell, and you can color me gone.
All right.
God bless
Stay
you.
safe, everybody.
Have a great week.